All right, we're back. It's COMP1002, Web and Internet Fundamentals here at Georgian, and it's week 12, lesson 12 of all weeks and 12s, part 1. And what we're talking about today is a bit of HTML5 and CSS3 with responsive web design, and then getting right into JavaScript, which I'm very excited to start off with you. It's a new topic, right? For people who've just started off programming, it's going to be a little bit advanced, right? If you've not done responsive web design before and stuff, and we've done a little bit of it here in class, we're going to talk about that first. But the JavaScript stuff is where people get either start loving the web or they start really, really hating the web, right? So just putting it out there to you because it becomes more challenging. Thank you. All right, so we talked about responsive web design and a couple times, and over the last while, I've got my my blank file again. I always start with a blank file with you guys, and I'm trying to do it faster and faster to build up to show you the same things over and over again, so you get a feel of building things like navigation bars, the same kind of things that we've been talking about over and over again, right? Just to get you guys more in tune with it. So I want to talk about a few topics today. One of them is, again, responsive web design. I also want to talk about Flexbox a little bit, right? And what that is. It's kind of a new thing in CSS3 over the last little while. It's supported by browsers, but there's going to be some backwards compatibility issues if you start using it. But it makes creating things like navigation and even aligning pages and everything else a lot easier when you use Flexbox, right? So we'll talk about the Flexbox model. You still use the box model like we've been using in CSS, but Flexbox allows us to get better when it comes to responsive web design. So let's set up our file. I'm going to start a project that I'm going to work with on GitHub. So I'm showing you GitHub over and over again for a reason, because one of the things I want you guys to to kind of be exposed to is GitHub, cloud computing, all those kind of topics that are extras. These are ancillary topics outside of the stuff that we're creating. So let's just get into a new repository here. And again, we're targeting Georgian. And we'll say COMP1002, lesson 12. So I create my repository first as normal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of these, this line here. And if you ever watch these recorded sessions. And let me just close this off for a second. When I go into Visual Studio Code, it's easy for me to find where my folder is, again, by right-clicking and kind of saying open in terminal, like we normally do. Here, I would do a git init, which, again, initializes my Git repository locally. And then what I want to do is I want to create a couple files. One of them is here, a git ignore file. A git ignore file tells me what files I'm going to ignore. I'm not going to put up on GitHub. That's my git ignore. And I know on the Mac, I don't want to record anything with DSStore. So DSStore is files I don't want up there. That's pretty much the only one I don't want up there right now. I'm also going to create just a stub for an index.html file, which I'm going to add to in a second. So index.html. In my index.html, I'm going to put all my requirements. And again, what I do with this is I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com, and you can go to any other place that you like to go to get your almost like a template for a web page. And GetBootstrap's just one of the pages that I can go with. I copy that, and I'm going to go back to here and paste. And again, I don't need all this stuff. So, and I'm going to kind of make my own. So I'm going to kind of get rid of all the stuff that I don't need. This is a kind of a quick way to kind of create a template. Get rid of all this stuff too. Even up to the hello. So I've got almost like a little template that I'm going to do, and we're going to just call this responsive web design COMP1002. Oh, let's call it lesson 12. Here we go. So I'll save that, and I got a couple files I want to put up. I also need a little bit of structure. Again, you've seen this stuff before. So here's my content, where I'm going to put my script file of my CSS, and I'm also going to create another folder that I'm going to call scripts. where I'm going to have my JavaScript today, and another folder where I'm going to put my assets, right? Maybe a couple folders underneath the assets, like an example images might be one, and another folder for fonts, and maybe one more for audio if you play games, make games, or any kind of audio. You want to put all that in there. So assets, audio, fonts. This is all the same stuff we've done over and over again. It's all review, right? Things that you've already seen time and again, right? So I've got my folder structure. I've got my git ignore file. I'm going to go back to my command line, and I'm going to say git add dot, which adds kind of everything to the staging area. And I'll say git commit -m, which is for message, and I'll say initial commit. So this commits everything to GitHub, my local GitHub. And again, I want to go to my GitHub repository here and grab this line here, like I said, and execute this line here in your command prompt or terminal. And when I do that, it adds the remote repository. And I'm just going to say git push -u origin master, which basically pushes my local repository to my remote. And now when I look up here, I can see that I've got a couple of files here, index.html, and my git ignore file. One of the things you notice also is that there are no folders here. There's no folders because I don't have anything in the folders, and GitHub will only add folders when you have stuff inside of them, right? Okay, so getting back. So we've got our basic folder structure, and we started off with our file fairly quickly. So let's talk about building our navigation bar again. And remember what we did before. We said nav, or some kind of header first. Inside our header, we have a nav bar. Inside our nav bar, we're going to have another list with several list items, right? Really quickly, each list item has an anchor tag. Each anchor tag, again, has some kind of href attribute, and we're going to put in the pound sign, which is basically, or the hashtag, which is basically telling us that it's not going to go anywhere. Each link isn't really going anywhere right now. We're going to use the curly braces to identify any kind of content for each of the links, and we're just going to call them all links this time. So we're not going to say link 1, link 2, because I'm going to replace those with my home, my 5-page kind of site that I always do. I'm doing the 5-page site over and over again because, like I said before, and I've said in other videos, it is the standard way. We do 99% of sites out there. They're just modified. So instead of products, you might have shopping, or shop. Instead of services, you might have some kind of gallery, right? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the majority of sites have most of these links in there, right? So I'll press tab, and I'm going to get this little unordered list. Now remember, for basic styling, what I want to do with my navigation, I need a style sheet. And we talked about external style sheets at length. So again, review, I need to have a link in there. And when I say style sheet, I need to have a style sheet to link to. So here's my content. I'm going to put a new file in my content. I'm going to call this main.css, which is the main style sheet that I'm going to use. And maybe I'll do a little bit of an annotation in there, and I'll say something like, main or custom styles. Right, these are my custom styles for my website, and I want to link to it because I don't link my style sheet to my web page. It's not going to do anything. So let's just do that. So I'll say, in my href, I got to go into my content folder, right? I got to navigate to it, and then I got to kind of point to my main.css, and that's where my stuff is. This is my main style sheet. I also want a reset because I like to reset my styles. So I'm going to go into that reset CSS link really quickly and grab that too. So I'm going to go here to meyerweb.com, like we've done a bunch of times, or there's other reset sites too, and just grab a bunch of this stuff. Right, this just resets all of our styles. And I'm going to go back into my my files here. I'm going to right-click on my content, new file, and we're going to put a reset.css. Right, so then we're going to do that. Paste all that stuff in there and save. And now I got to link my reset.css into my files. So I'm going to say link, and we're going to point to it by content reset.css, and that's going to reset everything to normal, right? So we got some reset styles in there. I also want to lay out my page a little bit, so I'm going to kind of do that really quickly. And if I'm going too fast, don't worry, because this is all the stuff you've seen a million times, right? We've seen this over and over again. And I'll put this up on GitHub. So if you want to grab it from GitHub afterwards, right, you can grab it. I just want to kind of do as a refresher, so you've seen this stuff over and over again, right? So this is my header section, right, where I'm going to put my navigation. And underneath that, I'm going to have a main section today, right? My main section, where I'm going to have some kind of a div with a wrapper around it, right? And then inside my div with a wrapper, I'm also going to put in some kind of main my main heading, and inside, next to my main heading, I'm going to use a plus now for next to, right? So greater than sign means inside of or a descendant of. Plus means next to, and I'm going to put a next to that. I'm going to put a paragraph tag, and inside my paragraph tag, I want to have lorem 200, right? And you know when I want two of these articles, I want to have an article 1 and an article 2. How do I do that? Well, I can surround these with braces or with brackets like this to say this is what's inside. So an article, right? And I want to duplicate this thing, so I'm going to copy this and put a plus in between them, right? So I have two of them, right? And this one, the second one will be an H2 tag, right, with secondary heading. You got to be careful though. With lorem 200, right? Now I got to go right to the end to make this all work. Right? And again, if this doesn't work out, I can undo, right? And that's the main thing. So I'm going to press tab, and I get all this, right? So you get a couple articles, primary heading or main heading, and a secondary heading with an H2 tag. If you notice, both have some content, and that's inside that thing. Let me undo so I can show you that line again, right? It looks like this, really quickly. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, I want a div tag with a class of wrapper. The dot means class, right? Greater than sign is the shortcut for that contains a main container tag, right? And again, greater than sign means, and then when I put brackets around these things, I kind of almost create a secondary area. I use almost order of operations. Now do all this. So get an article, inside the article I want an H1 tag. Inside the H1 tag, or the actual content for the H1 tag, that node is main heading. I use a plus for making it next to the H1 tag. I want a paragraph tag with a greater than sign lorem 200, which means inside the paragraph, give me some lorem ipsum standby text, if you will, or stand-in text, placeholder text, with 200 words. That's what it means, right? That's what lorem 200 means. So I've got that whole thing, that piece right there. And then what I do is I use a plus between those, and all I've done is copy this to over here, but changed it from an H1 to an H2, and then changed my content from main heading to secondary heading, both having, let's say, 200 words, right? I end that off, and on those two nodes, these are like two nodes, these two nodes here, that are underneath this node, the main node. And if I want to add a class to this, to main, for example, main content or something like that, I haven't programmed that class yet, but I could do that. I could say something like main content. I could do that. I could add a class, and if I press tab at the end, I get all that, and I get my wrapper with main content. So it's a quick way of doing, like, you know, stand-in text and creating some content for your files, right? I don't know how I would do this, and in the past, this would take me all this time to type all this kind of stuff out. I wouldn't ever do that anymore, right? With Emmet. Again, Emmet's built into Visual Studio Code. It's an extension that you have to add into brackets if you want to make brackets work for you. It also is included in Visual Studio 2013, 2015 with Visual Studio Web Essentials if you download that, right? It's also available for Sublime Text if you're a Sublime Text user, and you can also install it for Dreamweaver if you like that. Okay, so that I got that part, and I want to do the next part is going to be my footer. Right, so here's my footer section. And inside my footer section, I want to have, again, some kind of footer, right? So I'm going to say footer. Inside my footer, I'm going to have, let's say, an H4 tag with a copyright statement. Right? So copyright, and I'll fix this in a second, 2015. We're going to fix this up as well. We're going to use some JavaScript later on. Oops. Copyright 2015, and that's going to be my content. So I'm going to brace that in with curly braces in order for me to make that work. And then there it is. And I want to use the and copy, right? Little shortcut here. That's what it is. That basically gives me that copyright statement. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of stuff a little bit differently this time, right? I've got some stuff I want to add to GitHub now because I've changed my main. I've added reset. I've added my main.css, which doesn't have any styling right now associated with it, which I'm going to do in a second. And I'm going to add these three files, these changes, into my GitHub, my local Git repository. So I'm going to do that. But I have to give a message to them if I add them into the staging area. So I'm going to say updated or added CSS files and content to index.html. Some content, right? I click the checkbox. I'm going to go here and I'm going to go push right here in Visual Studio Code, and it's going to push it up to GitHub. So if I go check on GitHub now and refresh, you can see that it's got that code. And now I have a content file folder because I have content in there, right? If I don't, I won't do content. It won't actually push the folder up until I have content in the folder, all right? Questions around what I'm doing so far? Anyone seeing something that they've never seen before, they don't know how to do, or they have questions around what I just did? This is all review, right? All of it should be stuff you've seen a bunch of times by now. Yeah? Yes?
Oh, smart ass in me says, what's HTML? But other than
Keep asking those questions, Doug. Keep doing it, buddy. I love it. All right, so so we get some basic stuff that we've kind of laid out. And in the past, I've kind of run a server, HTTP server. It's a local little server to test my stuff with. And again, I've used npm to get that, right? So in order for you to use npm, you have to use Node, download and install Node, right? And so I can simulate a server. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to make it so that I just double-click my file because it's just a regular HTML file that I can do. So if I go into my my folder, right? So let's just reduce this and go over here, and I'm going to go into my COMP1002 lesson 12. You can notice that I can go right in here, and because it's an index.html file, it's a regular index. Notice I have no styling, right? Because I've just reset my styles. I got a bunch of links. So we're going to fix this page, right? Because this is pretty ugly, right? And we're going to do that with some basic styles. How do we do that? I want my links, like I said before, to have a certain style about them. And so we're going to put that in our style sheet. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And inside of our style sheet, I'm going to click on my main.css here. I'm going to start talking about some basics. So I need to know what my body tag is going to be. So here's my body. That's my first thing I want to add in. I'm also going to talk about my navigation. So this is the stuff that we've kind of built up before, navigation styles. And you know what? I want to add two things. I want to add a web font, Open Sans, like we did last time, so from Google, right? And I also want to add Font Awesome, which is a library of CSS fonts, so I can get those really cool icons and all that kind of stuff, which I like. So I got a couple things more to do before I'm ready to go, right? So, and again, I'm going to do this really quickly because you've seen it before. So I'm going to go to Google. So if I say Google Fonts, if you don't know where to get that, Google Fonts will take me here. Click on Google Fonts, and then it gives me a selection of fonts. You can pick whichever one you want. I'm just going to pick the first one, right? And click Add to Collection. When I click Add to Collection, you're going to see a choose. I want to choose this one, for my fonts. And I can also click Review, and I can click Use, right? And when I click Use, it tells me my page load scenario. This is like how long my page will take to load. So I'm going to reduce this a little bit. When I use these fonts. So I want a normal font, and I also want a bold. And you notice the page load goes up when I click that, because the more fonts I use, if I click more of these, that means it has to go to Google to retrieve the fonts in order for it to render, right? It won't render the fonts unless I go to Google first, get the information, and spit them out. So if I don't have a connection to the internet, I'm not going to get my fonts, right? And that's the thing. Now, you would say, well, why would you do that if you're not going to have a connection to the internet? But if I don't have a connection to the internet, then I don't have a web page, right? So And if Google's down, pretty much the whole world is down, right? So it's very rare that Google's ever down, right? So, chances are, you're pretty safe with using Google Fonts. All right, so that's one. I don't care about extra things. And down here inside my standard import in JavaScript, I have different ways of adding in my, my web fonts, right? So I could add it in as an HTML link to my web fonts, but that's bad because that means that every page is going to have this link, which is, I don't need that, right? The other way to do it is I can use the @import, right, which I use in URL, and the @import is part of CSS. I can include this as one of my my CSS objects, if you will, and this will import into my CSS. So I only have to include my CSS page inside my pages, and I'm good. I also have all my fonts, right? So I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to copy this line, and I'm going to go back to my page here, and at the top, before my body tag, I'm going to use the @import statement, which is going to import this Google font Open Sans. Not good to use though yet. I've imported it, but I still need to mention it in my fonts as a font family. Right? I can use that font family declaration, right, in order for me to use Open Sans as my Google font, right? So I'm going to go back to Google for a second, and down below it tells me what to do, right? Number 4 says, hey, use font family. So grab these, put that into my body tag, right? I'm going to go back to this, put it in there, so there's Open Sans. And again, I can specify a default font size. For example, I can say it's 1M or whatever. And 1M typically by default is 16 pixels. Or I can specify font size. So all my fonts for everything else. So I can say font size 16 pixels. Right? So that's my typical font size for my body, right? So when I do 1M, basically for my body tag, it's going to produce a default font size for everything else, right? Also, my font style right now is normal. I could specify different font styles for different parts of my page. For example, my heading tags, I want them to be all bold, right? So in order for me to do that, I'm going to go down in here, and I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say all my heading tags, H1, H2 with commas, right? So I can separate my a bunch of different tags that I want one style to be a part of. With commas, I can say all of them, I'm going to have a couple of styles for them. One of them is going to be a font weight, right? Font weight of bold. And I already specified bold. I want, kind of 400 for normal and 700 for bold. So it's going to get my H1 tags and my H2 tags and all that stuff as bold. But right now, they're all the same size. And I could specify different sizes for everything else. So let's say, for example, I want my H1 tag. We've done this before. My H1 tag to go into, my font size. I want that to be 2M, so 2 times the regular font size, right? So instead of 16 pixels, it's going to be 32 pixels, right? With a line height. Remember, line height is the separation of line height of something small like 2.2M. Right, as an example, like something bigger than the regular height. And I can keep doing that with my H2s, right? So I'm just going to go in here and keep typing. And here's my font size of 1.8 M's, right? And my line height is going to be 2 M's. And again, M's are the size of an M and the typical size of 16 pixels. H3, let's do my H3 tag as well. My font size is going to be 1.6 M, and it's going to be a line height of 1.8 M. So that's more than before. When we're checking this out, H4, so some basic styles, right? Font size of 1.4 M with my line height of 1.6 M. And we'll do a couple more and then we're done. H5. So when I do a reset, I reset all my basic styles, and I have to do this if I want my heading tags to mean anything, right? So 1.2 M, and with my line height of 1.4 M, you see the pattern, right? Not much difference there. And an H6, which is going to be really make it still a little larger than normal font size 1.1 em, you know, with a line height of 1.3 em. I can do different things. Now you can do your heading styles, and these are all heading styles, so I might as well put that into kind of some kind of notation. So I'll use my comment notation here. So I'll say these are heading styles. Right? Come on, Tom. There we go. And once I have that, if I check my web page again, and if I refresh my little web page, I can see now that I have some heading styles for everything. I want to also get, let me update that because that's the feature I just added. I just added in my Google fonts. So I'll go back into here, and I've got one thing that I changed, my main.css. So I'll click plus here for everything, and I'll say added Google fonts, web fonts. Right, that's what I've done there. Primarily, click the checkbox, go in here and do a push. So I'll push all those up to the changes up to GitHub. So if you're not, if I went too fast for you, take a look at GitHub for all the styles. You can always copy and paste if you need to keep up. Yes?
I noticed in your comments on the HTML side, everything's uppercase, or for the most part, it's uppercase. And in CSS, it's lowercase. Is that something distinct? Yes.
Well, that's that's my conventions that I use. Right? Everyone has different conventions for their comment styles. Notice that I can't use a double / If I go double / for thing, or if I do in CSS, where I do one of these, that doesn't work, right? Yeah. So because I have a different comment style, I make a different style for my CSS, and I'll even do another style for my JavaScript. JavaScript is going to be a little bit different as well.
So there's no industry standard.
There is, but typically either you do it's usually per different file type is how we normally do it. And for CSS, what I want you to learn is to separate your the standard styles that you're going to have, as an example, into sections, right? And put a comment. Now you can put whatever comments you want. This is your style that you're going to put in, right? So if you want to use all caps, that's fine, right? But if I look at someone else's code, do I see all caps? Or every time I see someone in a professional? No. Depending on the web design house that you work for, they might have a certain style that they ask you to use, right? Because they might have a convention that everybody uses in their shop, right? Okay, let's go back to this. So I'm going to go to my index.html for a second. So I've got this, and I want to style some of my navigation links now. And I don't want to do too much navigation because I want to use Flexbox today to style our navigation a little bit, right? So I want to make my header black, right? So I'm going to need to target my header as kind of my main header, or my masthead, if you will. So I'm going to give it a class of masthead. That's my masthead. And again, sometimes what happens is you separate the header, right, from the navigation. Right? I'm putting my navigation in my header. There's different ways of doing that. So for example, I could have a header that's separate from my main nav, almost like a masthead that goes on top. And then I have my main nav underneath that. And that's perfectly fine as well. I'm not going to do that today. Again, it all depends on the kind of page you're making, right? And this also, I'm going to give some classes here. So I could have done this when I created my shorthand. This is kind of my main navigation. So main nav. I can put main navigation. You can call it whatever you like. And there's my unordered list. And let's change some of these links so they actually say what they're supposed to say. So I'll say home and products and services. As we build up this page fairly quickly, about us and contact us. Okay, so this is the different objects that we have here. And look at that, they give me an href inside they give me a span. That's interesting. This is wrong. Notice I've got some issues here with my the stuff that I've added in. I get a span, which I don't want. And the span is giving me an href value. That's really wrong, actually. I don't know how that happened with my shorthand. That's a weird glitch that happens. Let me get rid of some of these for a second and fix that. And I don't need the span, that's for sure. I just noticed that now. It's got to be part of my href, so the href needs to be gone. It's really weird. I didn't notice that. Yay. Okay, that's what it should really look like, guys and girls. And what I want to do is copy this a bunch of times and fix that up. Right? So let's do that because I don't need anything else in there, just these things. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry about that. Products, services. That's just easier to do that. About us. I'll kill the last one. And contact us. That's weird. That's okay. We're just going to let go of that. All right, so we've got our links. I want to basically say my first link, I want to do an active. So I want to say a class is equal to active, and I kind of use that class active so I know which one's my active page, right? That's what I'm doing. It's just an indicator for me as a user, okay? I've got some of these pages, and then if you don't look right now at my links, they're going to look the same, just they're going to have home, product, services, about us, contact us, instead of what we had before, right? That's all we've changed. What I want to do here is I want to give a style for my header so that it's black, right? So again, if I do that, I'm going to go, let's do a split screen. And I'm going to look at my main.css here on the right and my index.html on my left. And on the right here, if you notice, with my split screen, I'm starting to do my my navigation style. So I'm going to kind of put that down here. So my header or my masthead, so masthead is what I called it, right? Masthead. What I want to do is I want to indicate some basic style from it. I want to say background color, right? My background dash color is going to be equal to black, right? So that's my background color. I also want to know that when I hover over any of my, see, main navigation might be too big. Let's just call this nav. Sorry, guys. I'll call this nav. My main navigation, if I hover over a link, an LI, that's over my main nav, anytime I hover over it, I want to kind of a different color, right? I want to do that. So I want to say kind of, I hover over my LI, and I do that. So I say nav, LI, and then inside there, I want to kind of produce a color for my list item, right? So I'm going to say background color, background dash color. For that one is going to be gray. Notice how we do that over and over again. And for my active styles, I can't remember that. We'll put a class of active. If it's named as a class of active, I want my background color, right, as an example, to be light gray, right, or dark gray. Let's say dark gray. One of these. And let's see the effect that has. So I go over here and refresh, and I see black, and I see this one is dark gray, and the rest of them are kind of still blue. That means that's bad, right? Because I want to have them have some kind of style. So let's do a couple more things to this. So the list items are cool, but I want to produce a couple of things from my standard items here. So nav A, so my navigation, my anchor tag, all anchor tags in my navigation bar, right? We'll have a color of white, let's say. That's for the color, the text color. And I also want them to, when they have a navigation of white, I also want the text decoration for them to be none. Right? So I want to have no text decoration. I want to have the underline in there. Right? So if I do that and I go back to my page and refresh, and just take away some of those styles. But my white, my color white didn't take effect. How come? Right? They're all blue still, the links. I said color white. Anybody? How come that didn't work? Did it work for you? Text decoration none, that worked. But color white for my anchor tags didn't work. Kayla, what should I do differently? What? So remember that when I have some of these things, if I hover over a, these things, I want them to, when I hover over my anchor tag, right? I hover over my anchor tag, I want it to be light gray, right? As an example, so I can do my my pseudo classes. So I can say my a hover, right? And what means that if I hover over an anchor element that's inside my nav, I want it to be whatever, right? Whatever my a hover is going to be. So I could change it so that my text color is a certain color, right? So I could say my color is still white. Could do that, right? I also want to discover things for my nav a visited, because if I've gone there before, that means all visited links. If I've ever gone there before, I want them to be white too, right? Because that's pretty standard. But if I do a hover or a visited, right? If I hover over their visit them or anything like them, and if I want them all to be white, then I could simply kind of put them all in one line. So I can say nav a hover, you know, as an example, nav a visited, right? What else? What are the other ones, right? Nav a, and if I kind of do a colon, you can see there's a bunch of other ones, right? So I have visited, and these are all the pseudo classes that you can use, right? Which we haven't explored everything of, right? But I can do things like, so if there's hover and there's focus, if I do focus, any of those things, I can make them all the same. So focus would be another one. So focus. So any one of these can have a color of white, right? And if I do that and go back here to refresh, right? As an example, there's still purple. How come? How come? Well, notice how when I click onto these things, and if I refresh the page, right? There we go. Now they've got the underlines underneath them. So I've got a couple of them with underlines, a couple of them with no underlines, right? And how come? Well, I'm targeting nav A. And if I go here and put text decoration none for all my elements, text decoration is none, right? And if I go back here to my list items and press refresh, right, still, we got the same things, right? So if I click on one of these things, right, how come I'm not working? Anybody have an idea? Does yours work? That's bad. Text decoration, none. Just doing really quickly. So that still is there. My underlines are there. How come? What takes away the underline? Right? Is it text decoration? Okay. What about if I choose other things in here? Come on, you guys are experts, right? Right now, you guys should be experts on this stuff. If I go text decoration, and if I look at pulling down some options, it gives me some other things here: dotted, threaded, right? And if I don't know what it is, right? So let's say, for example, I'm going to go in here to W3 Schools, which is a nice place to go, right, for this kind of stuff. And if I want to say, I want to look up text decoration. Let's just go with text decoration. There we go. Text decoration, CSS, right? And if I go here, you can see that there's on the H1 tag, the H2 tag, the H3 tag, I can put underline, line through, overline, right, all this kind of stuff. The default value is none for text decoration, but for links, when it comes to links, I have to specify a text decoration of none, or I'm going to have a problem, right? So again, going to W3 Schools for my is one place you can go. There's other places as well that you can get that value, right? And also list style type is another thing that we normally do when we do a navigation. So if I go to my list style type, that's on the UL, right? So if I go back to here, and one thing we didn't handle is the UL. Now we've got our reset happening anyway, and I'll show you my reset in a second. So if I go nav UL, and I can say my list style type, right, is, and again, there's different options, right? One of them is lower alpha, Georgian, none, which is what I want. I don't want anything for I don't want any bullets for my list style type. And like I said before, when I go back here, here's an error. Property value expected in my main CSS for my text decoration. I forgot to put that in. So I wanted none, right? But does none make sense? Because does a li hold text? No. A list item holds stuff, nodes. So really, text decoration is going to go under your nav, right? Okay, cool. Let's see why. Going back to my files here and refreshing, right? I still got this look and feel right here. And if I click on one of these, right, depending on what I click on, I don't see, notice how none of this changes. So if I kind of hover over here, that's my index.html, and no matter what I click, this just gives me this link. Well, let's go back for a second and fix that, right? Notice how I have my href value set to this. If I was going to put an actual value for all this stuff, right? Like an example, if I wanted to go to my index.html, this would be index.html here. Let me show you the difference. So this now is just a pound sign. I want you to understand what we're doing here. So products.html, and we'll just put the other ones in there, right? Services. And we'll do about us, so we'll call it about. And we'll also do contact. We've seen this before, right? Going back to this page and refreshing, you have a different look and feel to it all at once, right? You have a dark gray, which is in the background. When I hover over, I get nothing, right? So this doesn't make any sense, this list item. What I really meant to say is, on hover, right, I want to have a gray color, right? So refresh. So now on hover, I get this basic styling, right? Let's add some other things in here. I also want to give me some room for my basic styles. So I want my anchor tag to be, all my anchor tags to have a display block for now. So we're going to say display block, display, not display. So all of them they're going to have a display block, and I want to have them have a height or width, first of all, and it's not min width, but a width of a certain size, right? So let's say I want all my anchor tags to have a width of 60 pixels from a separation perspective. And I also want them to have a height of 40 pixels, right? What happens to my page now? What does it look like? Well, it looks like this, right? It gives me a kind of a height and a width, right? This is not quite big enough. 60 pixels is not big enough for About Us and Contact Us. So as we've tested this out before, I could create borders around it or whatever for all my anchor tags. Let's just do that. So we'll say just a test border here really quickly of 1 pixel solid red. Right? And when we do refresh over here, we get solid red for all of them. So you can see what my list item or my anchor tags look like. You can see that this one is too small because there are 60 pixels. So, and if I want to go from 60 pixels to, let's say, 80 pixels, let's try that out, right, and see what that looks like. Refresh. Still not enough, right? So let's go to 100 pixels. Why am I doing this? I'm specifying an absolute value, right? So 100 pixels looks like it's enough for what we've got over here. We got to specify kind of a minimum value for these, right? Because I want my stuff to fit in. Now, I also want to think about putting Font Awesome in next, right? So I need some space for my font, right? So I'm going to add more space for my font in there, my icon. So I know that probably if I put a font in for Contact Us, it's not enough space. So I want to do 120 pixels, let's say. And you know what? I know that because of responsive web design, I want to start talking in M's. How many M's is 120 pixels? I know you can do a quick division, or I can do one of these. I can go pixels to M's. So pixels to M's. And I can do a conversion. There's a nice little website that does it for us, pix to M's, right? Normally my pixel size is 16 pixels is my base pixel size right here, right? And I want to say, well, I want to do 120 pixels. Oops, 120 pixels. How many M's is it? Convert. And it's like 7.5 M's, right? That's the size of my, that I'm talking about from a width perspective. Let's go back. I could put 7.5 M's. I don't like having halves unless I have to, so let's make it just 8 M's. So each pixel, each width for all my links, my nav links are 8 M's, right? And what about pixel height? So I want to make it around 40 pixels, I think is probably the right height for each of my, I want to make up my bar at least 40 to 50 pixels, right? So if I'm going to convert, I have 2.5 M's. We'll make it, again, I'll round it up to, like, let's say 3 M's. So 3 M's. right? So 8 and 3 is what my ratio is going to be. Maybe I'll make it 8 and 4 later on. Let's take a look and see what that looks like by going back to here. Right, there we go. A little bit bigger. That's probably right size for my stuff. Now my text is way at the top. What can I do to bring this text? Now this is inside. My text is inside of my in here of my my anchor tag, right? Notice how when I hover over, the entire anchor tag now is filled up. I haven't touched my list items. My list items are inconsequential. All they are, as an example, is providing me with the style that when I hover over them. That's what they're doing right now, right? My anchor tag takes up the entire space, right? That's where I'm doing all my work, right? Okay, and I was trying to show you that last week. So I want them to do a couple things. One is I want each of these list items or these anchor tags to have center text, right? So how do I do that? How do I center the text inside of my item? What's the command? And where do I put that? Do I put it in my nav A? Do I put it in my list item? Where do I put that in? You guys don't know? It's in here, right? So if I go text align, let's do where I have the text decoration. I'll say text align, and I put the text align as center, right? Let's see if I do that, if that does anything for my text, right? So text align center. Now it looks kind of weird here, but remember what it's going to look like. I want to kind of put them inline, right? So I want my list to be inline right now, right? To make my navigation bar, right? And what am I making inline? I'm not making my my anchor tags inline. I'm gonna make my list items inline. I need to do that, right? So I'm gonna go back to my list items, right? So down over here, I'm gonna go nav li. So my list items themselves, the actual boxes that you see that are gonna move around, I want them to be display inline, right? When I do that, I get them. I get no effect. So how come they're displaying like the way they're doing? Well, because they're outside of their I want my list items also to encompass my anchor tags, and I can do that with overflow auto, right? Because that's going to shrink wrap my list items right now, my anchor tags. Again, no effect, right? How about if I do inline block? Is that the difference there? If I refresh, you can see that kind of puts them together next to each other, but there's a bit of a space between the two, right? That space is caused by a couple of things we'll talk about in a second. But notice how they're kind of next to each other, right? Okay, cool. So I've got my separation, but I want all this to go to the right, right? So the way I can do that, of course, is in my unordered list, right? I can say text align right. I know, like that's all the code I need. There's a lot of little pieces of code for me to align everything the way it's supposed to be, right? And I want my items, not only do I want them centered, but I want them to be my horizontal, my vertical alignment. I want it to be center, right? So how does that work? Is it that's inside my nav, right? So text align center, but if I put horizontal or align, vertical or horizontal. So there's vertical align, right? Here's my vertical align. I want my vertical align to be middle, right? Because I want the middle of my stuff to be in there. And if you notice, it kind of hovers and says, properties ignored due to display. Example, with display inline, the width, height, margin top, margin bottom, and float properties have no effect, right? And my display is blocked. But how is it that I'm getting a display inline? Right? How's that happening? Like, why is it saying that? Because in my nav element, right, I don't have any kind of thing that says display inline. I've got display inline block up here, right? So let's take a look at that. So here's my display inline block, but that's in my nav element, my nav li, my list item, not in my anchor tag. How come my anchor tag, as an example, it's giving me this message. I don't have display block or display inline here. I only have display block. Well, let's just take this away and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So if I go with one of these and I kind of do one of those, and again, this is all review. This navigation is kind of the main. You don't do navigation. That's cool, right? Still, I get this thing, middle. No effect for the middle, right? So what can I do if I know this isn't going to work because of my display property? Somewhere up in the line, I've got that. And if I kind of go back to my web page, you can see it's going to go back to this view. I don't have any kind of value in here. I know that my height of my lines is a certain height, just 1m right now for my navigation, right? 1m means 16 pixels. And if I have a total height, a total line height of 16 pixels right now around, and I want to add padding to the top. So padding top is going to push everything down, right? I don't care about padding to the right and left because I'm going to center it. I don't need padding right now. But padding for the top, for sure, I'm going to need to push it down, right? And if I have 16 pixels, how much, and if I have a 40 pixel height of my anchor tag, what's left? 24 pixels. So 24 pixels, that means I got to push everything down about 12 pixels. And I don't want to use pixels. I want to use M's because that's the right way to do it for responsive design. So 12 pixels, convert, 0.75 M's, right, as an example, to push down. Let's use that exact value this time, right? So I'm going to go back to my page, and I'm going to get rid of this value here, and I'm going to say padding top, specifying a padding top of 7.5 M's, right? And let's see, before I undo this comment, what it does for me. So I'm going to go back to here, and to my page and refresh. And whoa, that's huge. Not 7.5 M's, Tom, 0.75 M's. I did the job I wanted, right? Just didn't do it right. So, bam. Okay. But there's a problem, right? When I added padding, my total width got added to, right? My total height. Remember, width, when I do a width or height value in the box model, it's not separate, it's not contained in, but an additive value. So I've taken my 0.75 M's and added it to my height, right? So it's expanded my total height, right? So if I want a total height of 40 pixels, or approximately 8 M's, I've got to subtract that, my 0.75 M's, from the rest of my stuff. So I'll go back to my over here, and where I added 0.75 M's, I've got to reduce this size, my 8 M's, by 0.75 M's, which means it's going to be around 7.25 M's. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's try that again. It's going to be 2.25 M's for height. Right? Now let's see what we got. Refresh. That's much better. Right? So you see that it's kind of centered, right? And if I want to push it down a little bit more, because I think it's probably, I probably can push it down a little bit more. Now I do have borders in there, which have kind of distracted from everything. I could add a little bit more. So I could do something like subtract from one value and add to another one. So let's say, for example, you know, my total, my padding top, I want to push it down even more. So I'm going to go 0.8, which means I'd have to reduce this to 2.2, right, for total height. And when I go back to my page and I refresh, now it's a little better, right? I'm still pushing it down, right? Still in the middle. But around, it's kind of where I want it to be, kind of where it should be, around center, okay? And I can keep playing with this value until it's perfect. Let's put that, you know, this piece here, display inline block for a second. And let's just make it inline and talk about why inline's not working for us. Well, it didn't work before. Let's kind of do that. Inline's not working for us. How come, right? Well, it's part of our display features. And if you notice something else, right, when I go display inline, I lose some of this, the ability for me to do a hover, right? Here I did a hover, right? I'm doing a hover. When I put inline block, and if I go refresh, then suddenly it's perfect. It's exactly what I want, except for this little space in between. All right, we're going to talk about this little space in a second. Lots of work for navigation, lots of work. And you're going to say, holy crap, Todd, we spent an hour building up our navigation bar and everything else. So this is where Flexbox comes in. So I want to have Flexbox help me out, right? So let's take some of this stuff away. First of all, let's take our borders away, because I think the border thing is killing it. Okay? So I'm going to go into here and take the border away. And what I want to do is do a couple things first. I want to take away this text-align right from my UL. I'm going to take that away for a second. And what I want to say is I want my nav to have a display of flex. So first of all, let's do all this stuff here. I also want to take away my display inline block. Let's get rid of this for a second, right? I want to talk about this for a second to see what the difference is. So I've got my styles, right? But what I want to do is go back to this for a second. So here's my basic styles. That's what I got right now. So I want to add a different kind of thing for my nav. So I'm going to say nav. I'm going to change my display, and here's a new one, to flex. So I want to talk about Flexbox in a second. How do I do? What does that do for me? So if I refresh, it does this. Take a look what happens here to my stuff here. It's almost like I've got each of my items wrapping automatically, right? Okay, what's the next one that I need to use with Flexbox? So if I start talking about other things, I want to say Flex Wrap, right? And what are my options for Flex Wrap? I want to do a wrap, right? So I want to do kind of a Flex Wrap for my nav and see what I'm doing here. So it's wrapping. And I also want to kind of do, so if I go to Flex and if I look at Flex direction, right, as an example, I could also kind of, if I go to Flex direction for a second, and if I kind of put control space, I can see that it's column, row, different kinds of way of doing things, right? So if I do column, I'm just going to put column in there and see what that does. So I got some options. I'm just using my thing. Take a look at how it expands that again, back to normal. This is the whole thing. The whole thing is taken up on my Flex line. So what Flex does is it kind of makes it so that I can use my, it's a kind of a new style that's available for us in later versions of CSS3. Because remember, CSS3 is not a whole standard. It's a collection of standards that keep getting added to and revised, right? So if I was to check to see when I start using Flex, if I go Flexbox, right? Let's take a look at some Flexbox. CSS Tricks gives you one. You can look it up with Developer of Mozilla. Both of those are really kind of cool. If I go using CSS Flexible Boxes for a second. This is the idea behind them, right? You have your Flex container, and what you have is the ability for you to align things depending on how, you know, almost like in a grid kind of pattern, right? It makes things like responsive design techniques and everything else a lot easier when we use Flexbox. But we need to know what the support is for Flexbox. So I can go to the site called caniuse.com, right? And I can put in there Flexbox. If I go Flexbox, here's a flexible box model, right? You can see that this one, what the support is for this one across browsers. So right now, it's good for IE 11, right? Edge 13 and 14, upcoming 14, right? For, you know, on the Windows 10 platform, right? And you can see that there's this color here says partial support for older browsers, right? Partial support. But across Chrome, it's been around for Chrome and Firefox for quite a long time. So any Chrome or Firefox browser, you're good. Safari, 8 and 9. So the latest versions of Safari will work for you. Opera, no problem. Across iOS, definitely over the last couple of versions, no problem. And lots of versions of Android, right? So in terms of overall acceptance globally, it's 95.44% compatible. Now, there's going to be some backwards incompatibility with this. And you got to decide for yourself when you create your web pages, do I want to have backwards compatibility with older versions of IE, right, when I use the Flexbox model, right? And again, if you notice, there's Flex, there's Display, Inline Flex, Align Content, which is what I'm going to use in a second, right? Align Items, Align Self, Justify Content, and Order. All these different things here are the little tags, the properties we can use, right? And you know, so these are the ones that we can use. So one of the ones I want to use is Align Content, right? And I can do that. And if I look at if I go back to my styles here, right? I can align content. Instead of flex direction, let's just say in my nav, I want to say align content. And if I go control space, I can say that it's to the right or center or whatever, or flex end is what I want to really say. Now, what does flex end mean? If I go back to here, to this little picture, this is flex end up here to the side, right? So this is, you know, kind of the beginning, flex start, and this is flex end to the right, okay, for each item. And it's kind of cool in that you can decide, this is the kind of way you'd want to do it. So display flex. You can also use display inline flex, right? But what it does is it allows us to align our styles a little differently than what we did before. Now, there's also some prefixes we may need to use from backwards compatibility, right? For example, WebKit flex, as opposed to just flex by itself, because we can use backward compatibility. We haven't talked about effects. We kind of talk about that a little bit today. But that's the way we use it. We say display flex, and when we create a flex container, all the items inside of it inherit the flex property. Okay, so let's go back. So if I go back to this, and if I refresh, now I've said, you know, kind of flex to the end. But the thing is, in my nav, right, it's affecting my entire nav. Let's take away these two for a second here. So I've said my whole nav is a flexible box layout, right? And I also want to target my UL, right? So remember, I want to say, well, my nav, actually I've already done that here. My nav UL is going to use also a display flex, my flexible model. And inside there, I want to have my my alignment. So again, if you want to look at the codes for going over here, I want to use my align content, right? Here's my align content to flex end. This is my flex end. That's how I want to do it. And let's see what the effect that'll have on my style. So I'm going to refresh. There's my align content flex end, right? And take a look at this now. I don't have any separation really a lot in terms of my hand. If I go over here, I can see that this is what it does, my flex align content. All right, and this is for my UL, right? I also want to put in there flex wrap. So I want to wrap my content just in case there's no room for it. So refresh. Okay. So I've got my list items nicely wrapped. And if I kind of show you my responsive piece, what it's going to do is do one of these. It's going to try and align stuff in a grid pattern as much as possible, which is kind of cool. There we go. So it makes some things a little easier for me to do, right? Okay, for my list items, let's keep going. If I add, for all my list items, if I make a display value of flex, so I can keep going down here, it's display flex. Let's see what that does. And refresh. So at the beginning, nothing. And if I go, an example, if I say something like flex direction, right? If I flex direction, I want to say in columns, right? I can do that and see what that does for me. Right? Nothing. If I put flex direction column, say, let's get rid of align content flex end and flex wrap for a second. Let's go, I want to align things in columns and refresh, right? This is what it does using a column format, right? So I can align my list item the way I want, right? Let's go back here for a second. So these are the ones. If you wanted to know which ones are the ones that they use, display flex, display inline flex, align content, align items. I can also do that, align items. So let's see, my items in my UL would be my list items, right? So let's try that instead. So say instead of a flex direction, I can align items, right? And if I go control space, I can say center, flex end. Let's do flex end, see what that does for us. Align items, flex end. And if I go back to here, right, and I refresh, what happens? Back to this, right? So it kind of takes care of some of our issues, right, when it comes to the way we do stuff without using our navigation. It kind of fixes up our navigation a little bit, and it takes care of a lot of stuff that we normally can't do. Okay? So the three that you have to know is display flex, align content, right, is what we need to use as well, right? As well as align item. Now I notice how align items isn't supported. Once I see see how everything is red, but when I come down to here, it says align items, and items, this items part is a different color. support fails for some of this stuff when it comes to some of the issues that we have here. Let's go back to the web for a second for some examples. So it's giving us some indications here. If I want to do, this is something called the Holy Grail layout. I'm not going to go into that too much. But I want to use Flexbox for navigation, right? So I'm going to search for that. So I'm going to say Flexbox navigation, right? Navigation bar as an example, right? I'm going to go to CSS tricks, and it'll give us some examples of how to do that, right? So again, my bar, again, display flex, right? That's one thing I want to put in there. Align items center, which will align everything, all my, to get them aligned horizontally and centered, align items center. So if that's true, we use align items for, instead of using this padding that I did before, right? I want to be careful there for a second because we've added some padding and everything else. But if you notice here, my bar, align items centered, my width is 100%, my background, they've changed everything, my padding is 20 pixels. I'm not going to change all that stuff right now. They also do things like, there's the flex item itself. If I go flex 1, right, what allows me to do is I can say things like this. My nav bar, right, or my anchor tag, I can say things like, I will allow them to, if I go flex by itself, and if I say, there's 3 properties here that I can put in, okay? The first property is grow, the second property is shrink, and the third property is the minimum width, all right, that I can put in, right? So let's say if I go like this, if I say, I want to allow it to grow, I want to allow it to shrink, and I want my width to be auto, right? So I want to kind of space up everything, and I want to take away my width property here for a second, because that would mess me up. That would kind of conflict, right, with what I've done so far. If I do this for my anchor tag, what do I get? Go back to here and refresh, and I get this weird thing, right? So I haven't specified a width, right? So they're kind of running into each other, right? How about if I put in, instead of auto, right, I put in 8ems and see what that does for me, right? Nothing here. And what about if I put it into instead of my flex container, I make this a flex container. So I say display flex instead of block for a second. Now this is dangerous stuff. We're going to talk about what it does, right? And see what that does. Nothing, right? It doesn't affect us in any way, in fact. But this flex 1.1 item, when I make this display flex, it makes it into a flex container. Each one of my items can become a flex container. So let's undo some of these changes really quickly, and I'll show you what the other ones do. Right? Let's go to the, when I display inline for my list items, let's do that here. So say flex, allow my list items to grow, right? As an example, I will allow them to shrink 1, and my width is going to be auto. And let's just see this overflow auto piece. I'm going to comment this out and see what it does. And refresh. So again, I've got these items here. When I reduce this stuff from a response perspective, the items become hidden. That's different. That's a different thing than display inline block, right? Inline block would make these things fall into the next block. It would kind of make them stack, right? But in this case, they don't. Again, if I was to take some of these away, so if I was to kind of comment all this out to see the difference in effect, you see very little difference. Okay, so we're just adding flex on right now. That's all we're doing. And if I look at the flex model, so if I go Flexbox, flexible box model, CSS, and if I look through here, again, there's tons and tons of examples of how to do it and the support that you get. And they give you some support here in our W3 schools, right, where they talk about the flexible container, and then you have a flex item that's inside the container, and inside the container, you have these 3 flex items. And notice the flex items themselves would be, let's say, the LIs, and then the flexible container itself would be the UL in this particular example, right? You can make it whatever container you want, right? And notice how it says display flex, right, for the actual container itself. But for the list items themselves, you put the the display properties as you need them. So here's my flexible container, display flex, and then let's see if I can find a better example here for you online, so I can point you to it when I'm not around. And it's not really a great flexible align. So here's a line item stretch, right? A line item stretch. But I also want to make sure that my list items themselves have space around, right? So let's say I want to have my space around my list items. So go back to my over here as an example, and these are all my list items. So I'm going to kind of take this back to the way it was. So I'm just going to undo a bunch of times. Get rid of my display flex for a second. Get rid of all this stuff here, and I'm going to get rid of my UL align container. I'm just going to make that flex and my overflow auto for a second. So just go back to the way I had it before, and then I'll update. Right? And then we'll take a break. So I want to get to the other stuff. So my container, my UL is display flex. Let's get rid of my nav as display flex for a second. And let's see what I've got so far. I'm going back to the way it was before. Here it is, right? And in my list items, my nav LI, right? If I put in, as an example, for my list items is I want kind of space around, right? I want space around, or you can put for my alignment. So if I go for all my my different options, okay, that I have, again, I go back to some of this for some of these options. So again, display, flex, align content. If I align content, and let's say I'm going to kind of choose control space, and if I say center, right? What does this do for me if I want to? My feeling is it probably should be done here because my UL contains my list items. So here's my align content center, and go back to here, and refresh, and I'm still not getting what I want. And we're going to take a break, and when I come back, I'm going to show you the real way to do it when I remember. Okay, so let's take a short break, and we'll come back.